Welcome to Death and Aliens, an in-depth look at horror and sci-fi TV from two friends who vaguely know what they're doing. I'm MK.
And I'm Courtney.
And today we are joined by special guest, me Padre.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
So, Courtney, how's your week?
It's been okay. I got home today and the wine glass that I've been drinking my Coke out of was shattered on the floor from my lovely dog who likes to just knock things over when I'm gone. So that happened. The Saints lost. If you follow our Instagram, you saw. And I was happy for you guys that the Bills won, except I keep putting Singletary in on my fantasy team, and he's not doing anything. And it is really bothering me. So I need y'all to have a talk with him and tell him to step it up. Give me some points.
See, and this is the reason why I don't play fantasy football, because I root for teams, not players. Because even though Devin is not doing anything, the Bills have the highest point differential of any team in the league. So
Right. You're doing excellent. But I'm really pissed off the one player I have from you is not doing anything for me.
What did you think about stacking him with Zach Moss?
I think someone else may have had him. I don't know. I was in the middle of the draft, and so I got like the worst picks from both sides.
That's the Bills don't have a strong number one back. We're like we have a committee. So between Devin Singletary and Josh Allen and Zach Moss, you're going to get all your yardages. So it's unfortunate for people that need running backs in fantasy. On a wide receiver level, you have a lot of options, but not so much on the running back.
Yeah.
In another life, I actually used to be active on a sports podcast. So I just pop in there every once in a while, and I've retired from fantasy football though, because people kept yelling at me because I had I'd be rooting for my fantasy team when sometimes they were playing against the Bills, and that made everybody mad at me. So I just so I opted against it. But
I will say I never root against the Saints, but I can root for that one player to do good, but the Saints still need to win.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm with you on that.
How was your week, MK?
My week, I feel like it's been 6 years since the last time we did this podcast.
It's been, I think so.
Things that they don't tell you about teaching is that you will never sleep again for the rest of your life. But, I don't think I cried this week, so progress.
Points for you.
Take it where you can get it. Yeah. So we have my father here with us today because we are closing the door on the Kolchak chapter of Death and Aliens. We are combining our wrap-up with our second annual, and technically it's a different year, but not really annual, DNA awards, because I don't really think we can make 2 whole episodes out of this.
Well, I'm glad to be here to help with that. I was probably one of the motivators for the team here to do the show, hearkening back to my youth when I was 8, 9 years old, and this genre was just starting to become more fleshed out, and in a simpler time. Kolchak was actually frightening, or at least suspenseful. I won't necessarily always say frightening, but we've come so far from the times in the 70s with culture, with what we see visually, and so much of that the show has a completely different look today than it did when I was watching it as an 8-year-old, and then sitting up at night when you're not supposed to be watching television with, the TV on real low so your parents don't hear you at, 11 o'clock at night when you're supposed to be in bed and you're still watching horror So yeah, it's a little different nowadays.
Now,
So
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, what was your biggest takeaway from like rewatching it as an adult to when you were watching it as like an 8-year-old?
Well, just that. I guess the biggest thing is that being able to look at the writing and understand the storytelling better now. The stories were they had good elements, but they were not great stories. There was the stories were quick TV plot type stories. They weren't as well thought out as they could have been. The effects were terrible, and I say that if you created the suspense with a story that where you didn't show the rubber monster or or some of those things, it was much better. The shows that didn't actually try to show a creature but talk about a creature had a much better effect because they were able to use music cues and camera footage and camera moves and lighting to get suspense in a low level of horror. But when they showed you a crocodile in the Century, for instance, which was obviously the last episode of the series,
Yeah.
that was they did better with that. 10 years earlier in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea or Lost in Space with their or Star Trek back in the 60s with their cheap one-off monsters. So that's where the show kind of broke down. Anytime you showed the creature, there were only probably, I think, 2 creatures that may have been interesting visually. I kind of liked the swamp monster or the Spanish monster, Paramount Fed. That was visually okay, but anytime you went to the rubber suit level, it just broke down. So
Yeah.
and we've lived with so much more suspense, so much a more visual level of interaction over the last 50 years, or that the lighting and the sound don't do it as much anymore as they did then. So watching it today, it was you saw the kernel of what became a whole genre of television, and but it wasn't anywhere near as engaging as it was to a kid or even a young adult back then. Because the show was popular when it started. As they got more horror of the week or creature of the week, it kind of fizzled a little bit. That's why the show only managed to get 20 of the 24 episodes they produced.
Right.
I
And
didn't realize they had 4 more that they hadn't released.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were maybe not 4, maybe 3 more, but yeah, they actually had scripts for 3 additional episodes that they never actually were able to make.
Does that include the 3rd movie that was never actually made?
That I don't know. I know they had an episode here. I looked at some of my notes. If you don't mind, I'm going to look down for a second here because I can't read. There was an episode called Eve of Terror, which was the summary of that show was: if I told you that a deranged feminist murdered a Casanova lab technician, a sex goddess, and her purveyor. That was like Kolchak's line. The next one was the Get of Balial, and Kolchak was assigned to uncover a miners' strike in the mountains of West Virginia, where they uncovered gruesome murders with a backwoods family. And Kolchak suspected they had some sort of inbred monster living with them. And then the Executioners, where Kolchak was demoted and was given the choice of writing obituaries or articles for the arts section, which leads him to, and he picks the arts section, which leads him to discover a painting tied to a series of murders. So it's so those were 3. They actually, at least 2 of them might have been good if they were to produce them. I'm not sure about the West Virginia one, but that's,
I was going to say that's the one that I'm not rooting for.
Yeah, but it was, like I said, there was again the original Night Stalker movie, the actual Night Stalker that introduced the vampire. That was the highest rated television movies for ever, at least through the 70s. So it was popular, and that's what got the green light to spin off that series. So,
and it was done. The movies, I thought the movie was great. Like, I really enjoyed it. I was excited about the series from it.
When we watched the movies, I was like, this is going to be so good. And honestly, even the first few episodes were good. And then it just slowly got to be cliche.
Well, that's what happened.
Yeah. One of the things that you said, Dad, that I thought was interesting, because it touched on something that I had said to Monica earlier in the run of this show, was that I don't think that the stories were entirely at fault. Like, obviously they were written in a way to be that much TV and to get from beginning to end as in the time that they had. But there were a couple that I genuinely thought, if I read this as a short story or a book, I would be so into the story. But it's done so cheesy that I don't care.
Well, and the thing is that if you look at it, it's the television genre and writing for television in that kind of short window that they have that kind of led to the downside, because the writers overall, they were pretty good writers. Yeah. I mean, most people, again, I'm sure you've talked about it a number of times during the series, but David Chase, who was at one point the lead writer and one of the creators,
yeah,
he actually created The Sopranos. He was a fantastic writer. Mm-hmm. And one of the first writing credits for the creator of the Back to the Future series, Robert Zemeckis. He wrote what we would consider one of the memorable but not very good episodes, Chopper.
Yeah.
So people with good credit in the business were involved. And so, yeah, it's just when you kind of fall into that 1 hour format, you got 44 minutes to develop a story where, again, the type of character that Kolchak was, 44 minutes is sometimes not long enough to really build out the character. I mean, he was well developed over time, mm-hmm. but to develop like, what's the hook? You go through 30 minutes or 35 minutes of finding out something that you don't know, but in the last 10 minutes, you've solved it and you're moving on. I mean, that was The Century, for instance. I think actually in The Century, that last episode, which is right fresh in our minds, the answer came with 5 minutes left in the show. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like not a hook. That's not a way to wrap it up. It doesn't. Well,
and I also think I also think they suffered from something that was just part of how TV was made then, because you didn't have continuity in the way that we think of storytelling. So every week you had to reintroduce Kolchak's relationship to the police. You had to reintroduce Kolchak's relationship to the other people in his office. And all these things that took time away. They didn't do it the same every week, but those bits took away from what could have been a more fleshed out story.
And to touch on something else that you had said, you had talked about it being cheesy when they actually did it. It's because they couldn't seem to pick a lane. They should have just leaned into it when they realized, like Evil Dead, the original one, it leaned in. It had Army of Darkness, all of those Bruce Campbell movies and stuff. They were just like, this was supposed to be horror. It wasn't. We're giving up. And Kolchak, it clung to trying to be horror, even though it clearly was not making it after the first couple episodes.
And that's the thing, is that the horror piece, you could have gained suspense, not horror. I mean, that was, the scene where he's trying to sew the lips shut of the zombie, that was one of the scariest scenes I remember from my youth. That was just, that was good suspenseful filming with music that made you scared, Mm-hmm. So those types of things. I mean, and I think we talked about this before the show. Out of the 20 episodes we did see, I can probably remember clearly 6 of them, if you will, as the ones that, I don't remember Mr. Ring. I can't remember that one very well, looking back on it, but
I can't either. I can't remember Mr. Ring that well either, and I watched it a month
You know,
ago. So
and again, some of the episodes I remember not because they were good, but because they were cheesy. So Chopper, I mean, my brother and I, who think back on that, and even our cousins who used to watch with us, we just loved the headless motorcycle rider. I mean, it was a terrible. I mean, but it was not a good story per se, but it was memorable in its cheesiness. Some were memorable because they were well done, but others were on the extreme. And unfortunately, out of 20 episodes, 1/4 of them were memorable. The rest were there.
yeah.
Well,
And honestly, that's kind of how I feel like I can sum up this entire experience of watching Kolchak. 1/4 of it was memorable, and the rest was there.
oh, and one of the things that you mentioned about the mistake that people run into by having to reintroduce certain elements. It was more. They tried to make it more like a continuous drama, but they treated it like it was written like an anthology. Mm-hmm. So the challenge is every writer didn't know exactly what stage he could write from.
Right.
So you had that ability. You had about the only relationship that was fairly clear was the relationship between Tony and Carl.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, you got tired a little bit of them never believing him, right?
Okay.
It
was like at some point someone has to listen. Like he can't be this. Either he's right or he should be in a nut house with no job at this point.
Correct. And that's the thing is that, and again, I don't know that we want to talk about this now, but, that was our whole discussion about what you could have done differently. I mean, or how you could do it today. And, we live in a world where none of the things that he would get thwarted by are possible. Mm-hmm. Okay. They couldn't take his film and pull it out of his camera because it would be his phone. Okay. He would have video. It would have gone to the cloud already, Right. Yeah. None of those things happened. We live in such a high-tech world that, you couldn't use the same gimmicks to make the show work today. And if you set it in the same time period, no one would watch it because it's too anachronistic. Because young people, especially, they don't know a world where that's true.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't know a world where dial phones. The only way you could call the cops was find a phone book or phone booth. Yeah.
One of my students, and my dad has already heard the story. One of my students was paraphrasing a sentence in our writing class, and it said that there was a wireless telegraph, and they wrote a phone made for texting.
Which is funny, which is hysterical, because to be honest, most people don't even get it that you could text before you could talk. Because that's what it is. We send text messages, via telegraph. So we sent words or code for words. We didn't actually have, language that was transmitted, which is hysterical to think where we've come if you think about the whole full circle. But yeah, and kids say the darndest things, don't they now?
For sure.
Right.
I love that.
But again, I just the one takeaway for as much as it's not as awesome, if you will, as it was then, is that it was one of the leading edges of the genre, mm-hmm. And so many shows we've watched since then have some sort of if not a direct connection, like the X-Files, which was a direct homage to the show and its origins. But you also have things like Men in Black and so many other shows that come out with the whole, there's stuff going on out there that nobody gets to know because it would scare them to death. Mm-hmm. So we'll keep it all quiet. And so that genre, has been around and has been, somewhat developed. But it's made a lot of entertaining hours of television for people.
Yeah.
So, do you want to get into our award ceremony?
Award time!
So,
I'm going to create a journal for that next time.
Perfect. Like the last time we did these awards, I would like to start with the equivalent of the Razzies first and get all the worsts out of the way. So the first award is for the worst special effects, which this could be just about any of them. But I chose something near and dear to my heart, and that is the werewolf's face.
Yeah, that was rough. I want to preface my answers by saying I did not take notes on the first 14 episodes, so a lot of mine is more recent stuff. But my pick for the worst effect was Hecate's eye bags in the Youth Killer episode.
Oh, Kathie Lee Crosby, Helen's eye bags, yeah.
Very specifically that moment, because the rest of the episode was so well done for effects. That was just...
That was her aging, as it wasn't that when she was aging?
Yeah.
It was they picked up a eye pillow and put it on her face.
They did gorgeous old age makeup on all of the young people who died, and then when they showed her old, it was just here's some extra padding on your face.
Yeah.
Well, there were, like I said, there were a number of them. Those two are pretty good. I mean, honestly, the first episode that we really had very bad special effects was probably Werewolf, because that was the first episode where they really tried to show a monster, and they didn't render it at all well. They were so much better when they had it in the shadows. It was in the shadows for 90% of the show, okay? And even if you just showed it's really, I mean, the face was bad. I mean, I thought the hands were almost worse because they were not really werewolf-like. I mean, they were furry gloves, I guess you'd say. Because we've seen so many better effects of turning somebody into a werewolf, whether it was the more modern Harry Potter,
and I think
Hemlock Grove.
I was going to say, I think I'm super spoiled from Hemlock Grove because that is the best werewolf transformation.
And I was in a movie that was a little bit after, it was probably about 5 years or 6 years after this was the American Werewolf in London,
right?
Which was a movie that was very well done, and that transformation of David Naughton into the werewolf was well done. But a lot of the makeup effects, that was the mistake, because I think that they rendering a monster, I get it, but I tend to agree that that doing something as simple as face aging, they should have done it better. I mean, that really is what it comes down to. Of all of the things, that's just making someone look old.
Right.
I mean,
and they did it for all of the other characters in that episode.
It means that they had the ability to do it.
They had the ability to do it. They weren't trying to do something that was nobody really, knows what it looks like. And they have and again, it wasn't the simple monster of the week stuff. It was literally how do you make somebody look old? I mean, they've been doing that on TV for years before this happened. They could have done it better.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think
final ruling.
Yeah, I think that Dad's ruling there was those eye bags.
I think the eye bags were good at that. Like I said, ineffective monsters of the week. Listen, the first episode that I actually joined this on was the Father's Day episode, which actually was the werewolf. So we've actually discussed the werewolf in grave detail before. And I agree that was just, we just made such fun of that at the time. But that was bad. And then you can go through Chopper, the Century one. I just can't get that out of my mind.
I know.
The alligator was just, whatever that was. Not good. Not good. But the fact that they failed with something that was realizable, I think that's really a kind of a failing moment. So.
Right. For those of you who don't know this, if this is your first DNA Awards, what we are doing, me and Mary Kate are stating what we have picked for our awards, and then George is going to let us know what the final choice is. So we did not introduce that.
That's fine.
Our bad.
Well, and again, I think there'll be some awards where they're unanimous and others where they're,
Oh, for sure.
But
Yeah. The next award goes to the worst actor or actress performance in the show. And this one was hard because there's not a lot of like recurring characters really. So some people have very little to go off of. But I chose Suzanne Charney, who played the vampire in the episode The Vampire, because she had absolutely no dialogue except for when she made weird wailing sounds that were not vampire-like. And she hissed a lot, which kind of felt like a cat instead of a vampire. I wasn't really sure what was going on there.
So I picked Corinne Camacho, who played Dr. Leslie Dyer. And I forgot what episode it was on because I did this so long ago. But it was kind of she was from Little House on the Prairie. And it wasn't necessarily, I don't remember the episode, but I remember thinking, it's not necessarily the situation she wanted. She was what?
Corinne Camacho was in Ring, Mr. Ring.
Oh,
Okay,
she was the one who made sexual advances toward the robot.
Yes. I picked her because I was like, this storyline in a sci-fi show should have been so much better done. And with the plot being that she like was in love with this robot or like was parenting this robot, we don't know. And I'm like, we should have been able to tell, first of all, what her relationship was. And I felt like it was a little overacted by the end. And that's why I picked her.
Okay. It's funny. She actually doesn't have a lot of credits out there. But the show was full of the pop stars of the era, whether they were long-term television stars or potential up and comers, you had Eric Estrada, who was just about to become, television famous for Chips, be a Aztec sacrifice victim, and Dick Van Patten had his lawn splashed with like bone marrow in the Alien episode, and there were so many people that were out there. From a character perspective, I'll be quite frank, I didn't watch Ring recently when you guys were watching it, so I don't have a real good feel for that.
That's fair.
But I would in this case I'll agree with Mary Kate, because we were just so frustrated that Janos Skorinsky, the vampire from the movies, was a character. He had like dialogue. He was, he wasn't just a stereotype, crazy like, Batwoman. Because she really didn't, she was supposed to be his victim. Okay, who was now, so that was supposed to be the continuity where she was one of the victims of him before he was killed by Kolchak, and that she was just coming back now in a sequel. And basically almost all of her life she just became a not even a good caricature of a vampire. Her day life was, she was barely a prostitute. You know what I mean? I just didn't, all the things you could have been done well. Because especially in the earlier episodes, there was a lot of, mature references. Right. A lot of bar scenes, a lot of, women of the night, a lot of that whole dubious underbelly of society that was.
Yeah. It being said Chicago in the 70s.
Yeah. And they went to all these places. They actually did things in like Louisiana, and they did things in Las Vegas, where there was a night culture. But she was just a bad character. Yeah. A bad character. So, I'm not trying to go back and forth on these between you guys, but like I said, that one, the screeching thing, we were befuddled by how she could have been just, that wasn't even scary. It wasn't like, what's this chick yelling at me for? I guess it was her strength, because other than that, you would have just laughed at her, right?
Yeah, at one point she killed a grown man by hissing at him, and I was like,
So I actually agree with that ruling because she was on my list of people. Yeah. It was a short list because there was a lot going on, and she was on my list too. So
the next award goes to the worst episode of this show. And mine, I picked The Devil's Platform just because it was the one that I could remember the least. So it clearly wasn't great.
So I picked The Devil's Platform because I wanted that one to be so much more than it was based on the storyline. But I ended up going with Bad Medicine based on all of the issues that may not have been issues in the 70s, but it was just very
cultural insensitivities.
Very culturally insensitive. It was, but it also, like, even on top of that, it wasn't a show. I remember watching it for the first time and I was like, what is even happening? I couldn't pay attention to what was going on. I couldn't remember what was happening. If you asked me what happened today, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. And so, like, on top of not knowing what was happening in cultural insensitivity, I went with Bad Medicine.
Yeah. I remember that being...
was the Cujo.
I was going to say, do you remember either of these episodes?
Well, no, Bad Medicine, yeah. I mean, like I said, I remember them... I remember Bad Medicine in its abstract because I remember obviously that Richard Kyle played the monster, whatever that was, the demon or whatever his name was, Diablo or whatever. I don't even remember. Diabolero, I guess that's what it was.
Oh yeah, the Diabolero, yeah.
Diabolero. But Richard Kyle, obviously, he was a tall man who played a lot of villainous roles. You know, he was in James Bond movies as Jaws and things like that. But yeah, the period was, I mean, that was like, I would agree with the cultural insensitivity of that. That was just, you know, we've come a long way. You know, you could still tell that story, but not make it, because again, I think the stories that were rooted in myth, and myths that were not, primarily like normal for Americans or people to know in general. I mean, if you think about it, the vampire werewolf from the horror mythos, everybody kind of knows that. Even to some degree, Hecate and that kind of Greek Roman style myth.
And even the voodoo. The voodoo wasn't necessarily insensitive based on how they portrayed it.
But again, they did it much better.
Mm-hmm. And even with the Native American myths, when they did the Energy Eater and did Macho Manito, they still were able to do it less aggressively.
Right.
And so I can see that. Now my other thing though is that you took a guy like Tom Skerritt who eventually was in Top Gun and Steel Magnolias, and you made him a politician who was sold his soul to the devil. I would have liked that to be better too.
Right, on the premise, that's great. But really, it was just a precursor to Cujo.
Yeah. So, but from like I said, so I tend to lean towards the political thing myself, but at the same time, there was, it was really not a good portrayal of the myth or the people in the Bad Medicine episode. I mean, the whole witchcraft and demon thing, that wasn't too bad actually in the devil or whatever it was
Demon
called.
and Lace. Yeah. Or the Devil's Platform.
Devil's Platform.
Yeah.
But, again, I didn't think that was as bad. I thought there was things that could have been better written in it, but it wasn't. It was just less memorable, I think. Yeah. But I think, like you said, not only what I kind of think today, but some of the comments that were going on when you guys were actually filming that, and just some of the just crazy level of stereotypes. I think that makes that probably the most and I hate to use the word problematic because I don't really think like that, but it was pretty problematic.
It was based on, because at that time you have to put it in the time it was in, but if you compare it to all the other episodes, that it was like it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
because they did so well in all of the different
Right.
cultures and all the different myths they did.
Yeah, I mean, because
And it wasn't done well.
right, and I know when we first made the when we first talked about bad medicine, I was very like careful about condemning because I was like, it's the 70s, you have to remember. But then we saw Energy Eater, and I was like, oh no, so like they did know how to do it. They
Right.
just didn't.
Right. And you look at the Aztecs, you look at the voodoo one, those would have been the other two I would have been like, these are going to have to be careful. And those were fine. I mean, okay, voodoo was very stereotypical and like, but it wasn't insensitive, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that are stereotypical that can be presented fine because
Right.
Because stereotypes have some basis in truth. They're just exaggerated.
But to go over the top, I mean, and that's the problem is that most things that go over the top do it to their own detriment. I mean, in the past, a lot of things that that wouldn't be done today were only maybe a little bit overboard. If they would have just pulled back a little bit, but they didn't have that. They didn't have any reins then, or the reins were less clear.
Yeah.
And so they went to the cheap, quick.
Yeah.
How do we do this fast, and how do we make it relate to people in almost a caricature or farcical way? But it was that kind of thing that was also, but it was insensitive to do it because it really wasn't, because demographically you weren't looking at it. You didn't really care who was, you didn't care about the, who might be offended. Not to say that you shouldn't do shows that might offend people because I mean, comedy, if you're jumping out of this genre, but comedy exists to offend. And if you can't offend anybody, you can't really be a comic. I mean, we've gone a little bit too far in the other direction. But you also can't be foolish about how you approach it. And I think that was just maybe one step beyond.
Right. And I mean, I think on that line of comedy, if they leaned more into their comedic underbelly, I guess, underlying, maybe it would have seemed less insensitive than it did, but they were still, by the time Bad Medicine came out, it was like 6 or 8 or somewhere in there. They were still trying to keep their horror and kids, so it's like you can't even make this a joke like at this point. And so
I think Chopper was kind of a caricature of itself, really, if you think about it.
For sure.
That's the only way you could have presented it. You couldn't really take it seriously. I mean, I think
Bad Medicine still
that was episode 17 compared to episode 8. I think there's a difference.
Right.
All right. So that one goes to Courtney. The next is for the biggest plot hole, which this one was difficult this time around. But mine, I chose the logic of who was killed in Firefall. Because in the episode description, they say that this man is a gangster who is killing people that he had like problems with when he was alive. Except that he's not. He's only killing people that are related to the conductor whose body he's taken over. And so the whole like thought process of this possession makes zero sense.
So mine may or may not be a plot hole. I did some research, but it was from early on, so I don't know if I'm misremembering or if it was actually a plot hole. What's her name? Carol Ann Susie, her character just disappearing. Because I know at one point in like episode 4, I think, he sent her to New York or something, but then she came back for another episode 6, and I tried to look it up, and I was like, did she actually just go away with no explanation? And so I think that happened. And if so,
it did, but I think that was still in the beginning when they hadn't had a set office staff. Like that was when they were still figuring out the like continuity part of the show.
I feel like they really wanted to push her in the beginning because they were like, we're going to put this relationship with Carl. He's going to be like, oh, why is she driving me crazy? And she's just going to always be there. And then she wasn't. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going to have Miss Emily instead. Like, so that's my plot hole.
But it's because his relation, I think the reason they ended up going in the Miss Emily direction was because his relationship to, what was her name, Monique, and to Ron were both so antagonistic. There had to be somebody on his side.
I agree. I just think that, like, even though it's anthology, it's not anthology in the sense of Twilight Zone. It's anthology in the sense of, like, more sitcom style, I guess. So where, like, you don't have to be necessarily one after the other, but there's still some consistency. And so if you have any consistency, you need to, like, close it out, which is my problem with the whole series. It didn't get closed out.
Well, that's always the challenge with something that, to be honest, most series don't end. And that's one of the challenges, especially with the way TV and writing used to happen, is that they were mostly anthologies. There was no beginning and end. There was just a frame, and that's where you have a framing story, you have a framing narrative, and then you do things within your narrative.
Yeah.
A lot of shows that were very popular were just ended after, like, the ratings went down. They didn't get a farewell episode or anything like that. They were just done, canceled. It only ever really hurts the show that does actually have a continuity of story, where you're like, well, it kind of ends on a cliffhanger. What is that? There's so many shows throughout history that have ended on a cliffhanger. You're like, what in the world are you supposed to?
Right.
Because people like continuity, like canon, like stories. They want to know the beginning and the end. That's why they engage with these characters. Now, again, a show gets canceled for a couple of reasons. Sometimes it's because of non-interest. That doesn't mean the people that loved it aren't totally in love with it, but it's just not getting enough ratings. Other reasons are people that are on the show are human beings who aren't, like, enslaved to their programs, and they have to leave for some reason, whether it's, but that never does the fan a full service, if you will, in the end. And, that's why in modern times, a lot of programs have come back and done, like, wrap-up movies or whatever.
Right.
If they, like Veronica Mars. Now, Veronica Mars went beyond that again, but, everybody, it wasn't a highly rated show because it was a fairly niche program.
Yeah. And
Very
Young and
entertaining.
Hungry. I'm still cheering for you, Young and Hungry. I'm waiting for that movie.
If Colony got a final wrap up too, that would be great. 'Cause I'm still mad at that.
Young and Hungry is not the kind of show that would ever get a final wrap up. I don't.
They've talked about a movie for 3 or 4 years, maybe like 8 years now.
No,
And
that is the show with Hannah Montana's friend, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. I forget her actress.
Emily Osment.
Emily Osment.
Emily Osment. Yeah, that was her next vehicle after Hannah Montana. It was funny. It was funny as those shows go, but yeah. So I think that they never got the frame right. I think that that they tried the Office dynamic and they didn't really ever work one out that was good. I mean, I think you needed her character. Actually, I really do. I think that Kolchak being a loner was a great premise, but I think the dynamic of Carl. Mary Kate, are you frozen?
No, I'm just
okay.
listening.
You're listening. I apologize. I didn't mean to say that, but it just looked like you were, nothing was moving on the screen. So anyhow, I apologize. But that Carl needed a dynamic because him and Tony were a great dynamic, and some of the jokes, some of the straight man with Ron,
Oh yeah.
But the older woman, Miss
Emily.
Emily, that was cute, but it wasn't really, I mean, that he stole her hat to get away or whatever. One time I remember seeing that. But she was just. I think that if Vincenzo could have used Carol Ann's character to really add a dynamic level to the stories, but again, you can't build that in 45 minutes without some give or take.
And I wonder if they took her away because they were trying to lean more into horror, and she was definitely more on the quirky humor side, and she would have really leaned into that and added to it.
That could be, and I kind of like that as a I won't say it's a plot hole, but I'd say it's like a defect. You know, it's a defect in the overall show. Plot holes, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of them. I mean, aren't there really? I mean, you know, things just happen too quick.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure what the best one would be. I mean, the conductor one is clearly a plot hole. I mean, like literally the arsonist basically just said, "I'm an arsonist. I took over the conductor, and now I'll just hate his people. Now I'll just hate the guy who possessed things." And it doesn't really have any connection to the. I mean, was his motivation to just come back and burn shit? Pardon me, but was that his?
Yeah.
I mean, that whole why did he do that? What was the motivation for him to possess?
Right. I really enjoyed that episode, but it had no motivation.
It's not that it's a. It's not
like
that
there was no background.
It's bad. It's just. I mean, it was entertaining, but it was just. You know.
There was no why. Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree.
My biggest problem with there being no why is that they attempted to say that there was a why, but then it didn't fit what actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let me just take a look here in my little notes. So, I don't know. I think I'll go with the plot hole just in the fire one there, just because it actually is a true plot hole.
Right.
But as a whole, I mean, I agree with you, Courtney, that there were things that, like, again, that fits in my category of what was a tweak that would have changed the dynamic, that would have maybe given the series a better tone, a different tone, or longevity.
Yeah.
Those were some things. I mean, again, a lot of anthology series, you know, if the frame for an anthology series creates continuity, it then helps tell the story. It's not just going from, you know, it's not having to retell the same thing.
Right, because I mean, like, you think about the X-Files had a very Kolchak feel, but it also wouldn't have worked if you didn't have them.
Yeah, there was a beginning and an end, and when the TV series didn't end, they got a movie.
Yeah,
or two even.
And Kolchak went backwards. It had the movies first, and then came into the show. And I mean, that's another problem I've had with Kolchak is, like, they knew they got canceled, and they still didn't wrap it up, like, before shooting this last episode.
Right. And again, that's the key, is that those things didn't matter to them.
They just didn't pick a lane. I mean, whether it was horror versus comedy, whether it was anthology versus we have an underlying storyline, they didn't go full anthology like Twilight Zone. They still wanted to have an underlying storyline, but then they didn't follow it.
Yeah.
But the thing is that when shows were written back then, that was just
how they did it.
Well, it was how they did it, but what was happening in the industry and in entertainment as a whole is you had Star Trek in the 60s, and that phenomena of fandom, not people who were entertained by a program, because there were plenty of television that had been around for, but the level of fandom that people who bought into your narrative and how they cared about it, that was just at the cutting edge of that. I mean, the Star Trek conventions had just started about 2 or 3 years before this show started. You know, it helped bring back the series and animated. I mean, it was still years before they were going to go to a movie, but that whole idea of people who loved a show and the world it provided so much that they cared how it ended. They, you know, people had the same problem with Star Trek, you know, a few years earlier. What was the last episode? None. There was no wrap up. I mean, and that led to a whole universe that's gone on for, you know, 50 plus years. Yeah. And those are the kinds of things. Kolchak didn't get that kind of fan support because it was even on less than Star Trek. But what it did do is it created a conceptual framework that was then carried out much better in future, for future generations.
Agree.
And a lot of those shows, I mean, that's the one thing that Kolchak did, and I don't know it did it well all the time, but it did mix all of those things. It was funny, okay, because it was situationally funny. I mean, sometimes just the way Carl behaved was hysterical, okay? And certainly he was dressed to be humorous. His costume was not made to be a serious reporter. He was basically a has-been, kind of deadbeat reporter in a seersucker suit who wore a hat when nobody was wearing hats anymore. And, all of those things. I mean, the whole character, hard-nosed ball. I mean, all of this, all of the tropes were there, and they played really well, but they never caught the right vibe for the show because they were trying to be too much and not know where they were headed with that.
Right. Exactly.
Well, now we can get on to some more exciting things because we are done with the worst awards. The next one is the best plot twist. Now, this one I struggled with a little bit because I think a lot of it was super formulaic, so there weren't as many plot twists. But I went with the identity of the witch in the Trevi collection.
Okay, that was a good one. I forgot about that. I went with an unpopular opinion. I actually went with the plot twist in Mr. Ring, where it turns out the robot was actually the woman's robot, because first of all, I forgot about the witch one, but also I was like, everything else, like we talked about earlier, we didn't find out until the very end what was happening. It was like the last 5 minutes. Okay, it's over. And this one, like, we had a storyline, and while it wasn't implemented well, the story itself was a good plot twist. That it was humanoid, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, no plot twist.
Okay.
I think the Trevi witch was better. I just about it.
Well, yeah, I just, I guess I can go with that one. And, again, because Mr. Ring, I don't really have, that's like one of the least memorable episodes to me. I remember, here's the funny thing, is that I certainly remember the witch episode. But I don't remember from my youth, because as a boy, I could have cared less about fashion and witches, and that was just not I was totally not there with that one. So that one was one of my least memorable ones. But the fact that you both appreciate that situation, I think the witch one is going to get my vote this time.
All right.
I think if you look at it, it was one that truly shocked me watching it. I truly did not figure it out until 3/4 of the way in, and the other ones it was straightforward, or they were just like didn't tell you anything until the very end. So I do think it was probably the best plot twist.
For best writer, this one I went back and forth because, like, obviously we have people who later in their careers were phenomenal writers, but I went with like the actual writing of the episodes, and I chose Rudolph Borchardt.
Me too.
He wrote the Trevi collection. He wrote The Ripper. He wrote
Energy Eater, the aliens,
the alien one. Yeah.
I think.
So,
well, he did not write the story for the alien episode. He wrote the.
No, he did the teleplay. Yeah,
that's fine, because honestly, I that's one of my favorites.
Alien?
Of all the alien one, because I thought that was completely done to not ever show an alien.
yes.
But to create the effect of an alien and the concept of something out there, something different.
Right.
So I think I would agree with you that choice was a mutual decision.
Yes.
And I agree with that, because I think that was he offered a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, Chase did a great job with a lot of his stuff because he contributed to a lot of these episodes. If he was either the teleplay was by him and the other guy wrote it, or
Yeah.
but definitely I think his work, Rudolph, is that his name? That's his Rudolph,
Yeah.
right? Was really one of the positive elements of the show.
Yep. Definitely agree.
The next is the best death.
Okay.
This one I kind of took a cop out because I didn't really like anybody's death in the TV show, so I went with the first murder in the first movie because I really liked that.
So I went with the one that made me feel the most things, and so I picked the one where the birds killed them in the Aztec one because I laughed forever when I watched them come on the screen. So it wasn't like if you're looking for horror.
I thought about going with when the girl did a cartwheel off of the balcony in The Youth Killer, because that one was really good in terms of what did I just watch. But when it comes to actually good visual deaths, I went with the movie.
Right. That's why I went with the birds because I laughed the most on that death. It had the most impact on me out of all the deaths because the rest of them were not that much. There wasn't that much happening there.
I would have picked, if I was me, I would have picked the animals in that were killed by the aliens for their bone marrow, because those scenes were like where the animals were like in the cages, and there was a lot of, there was all of that, like all of the mysterious background and all of that stuff.
Oh yeah, and the animals just like
they were scared and they were jumping around and like all the alien noises in the background, and again, and you didn't see them die except you knew they died, and that was just
that probably was the best
because it was just I thought it was. I mean, again, the movies did a lot of things that were really well done, but just from the animal thing was like unique because you don't see like animals being killed like that, as part of like, because the aliens weren't discriminate. They really didn't care. They just wanted the bone marrow.
That's true.
So I just thought that always stuck out at me as like a weird scene, because most of the other deaths were people like going, or kind of like, freeze frame at the horror, or like, and wasn't there a scene where somebody gets their head cut off in one of the later episodes, like when they were like, didn't the chopper guy do that to somebody when he was riding the bike and he had like a sword or something? Didn't he cut off a head?
Probably.
Well, I know he cut the one guy in half, but I think the other guy he did just.
Yeah, but no, like I said, I like the two different perspectives. One was that it was a really good death scene. One was that it was just too funny that you couldn't really, do anything with it. Being mauled by the hands of the werewolf, that was not a good death scene. That was kind of sad. Being thrown by a lizard man and you're dead. I'm not exactly sure how the lizard man throwing you die is really good, but
Ooh, I just thought of one that was a little bit of both. The guy in the Firefall, the first guy who falls asleep in his bed and they have the body like burned up. It was both kind of good special effects and also like, what the fuck was that?
I mean, you're not wrong.
Uh-huh.
I'm leaning towards the alien one. I didn't think about that one.
No, I didn't think about the animals either. I was thinking only of human death, but animals.
Well, that's just, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's just that was because it was so weird and you don't see those things.
Yeah.
That's why it created a lot of drama, because it was like, what's going on? And these animals are freaking out, and you hear the weird, like the alien sound effect, which was like a kind of a windy thing. And so I know that sticks with me. Most of the other ones were, like you said, that for me, they were cheesy science fiction deaths. It's like,
exactly.
Stop the scene right at the point. Nobody got. I mean, it wasn't error before gore happened. So even when people got cut up and everything, there was no blood. I mean, you never saw anybody get like blowed up real good or anything like that. It was just
right.
so what made it? The movie had a pretty good effect because it was they were able to do a little bit more, and they had a little bit higher budget to do it.
Yeah.
But I just, like I said, I thought for me the weird death scene that actually stood out was just that crazy animal one.
I think you're right. I think neither of us won, and yours is right.
Well, I mean, because I didn't even pick one that was in the show, so like.
Well, it still counts though. We're wrapping the whole thing up.
We watched, we started at the movies. We watched both movies before we jumped into the Ripper, so that was part of the whole, continuity of the show. I mean, the movie had a sequel.
Yeah.
A sequel, by the way.
What was that?
It was the only thing that had a sequel.
Yeah.
Of course, we already said that was the worst realization of a female vampire, but anyhow, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
So next would be the best special effects. I chose basically the exact opposite of what Courtney chose for the worst special effects, and I chose the old people in the Youth Killer, the people slowly aging.
I also chose that because that was hands down.
It was the only practical makeup effect that I thought was actually well done for pretty much the entire show.
Well, everything else was costumes or like lighting.
And there was some really good lighting effects early in the show, but in terms of like makeup or technical effects, I really thought that the age makeup in the Youth Killer was probably the only genuinely good one.
I agree.
I'm just trying to remember what the episode's name was. I apologize. The episode with was it David Carradine?
Oh.
That was
what was it about?
It was when they went to the underground. Was that the second movie?
Yes, the David Carradine one was the second movie.
Where they went to the underground in Seattle.
Yes, it was The Strangler, the second movie.
The Strangler, the second one. But actually, though, I was just picking that up to actually reinforce your comment that they did that. They aged him in that episode too because he had to strangle people to.
Yes. It was the alchemist thing. It was that last moment of his aging.
And that was done well, I thought too. So I think they got the aging thing right. That's why if they do it poorly, it's terrible because they did it very well when they aged him after he couldn't do the third formula in the Strangler. Excuse me.
Yes.
So I would agree with you guys that that's a good choice. I mean, a lot of their effects were not well done. Certainly the visual effects. I mean, sometimes if you mixed, the alien organ effect in the planetarium with a little bit of visual, a little bit of sound, lighting. Mm-hmm. That was pretty good because again, I'm fond of that episode. I have to tell you.
Yeah. No, but I think in the alien episode. In the alien episode, and then also in the Ripper, like they did a lot of stuff with light that was really, really nice. But I think
a practical visual effect. Yeah, it was.
That was one of my biggest problems. Like, I know I've said this probably 50 times, but like you saw in episode 19, I think it was Youth Killer, that they did so well in their visual effects, and it's like, why haven't they been able to do this all along, or even in this same episode, or in the episode 20? Like, that was my biggest thing. Is like they are capable of doing this so well, and they just don't.
Well, that's it. And the other, and that's I guess. When you approach television like this, that's, there was not, there wasn't a lot of heavy effects television. Mm-hmm. I mean, the biggest effects you got in most television of this era, was cars blowing up.
Yeah. Everything was clay, molded.
Yeah. And like I said, so you didn't really, there was some makeup, but most shows weren't this kind of costume, visual effect, SFX type stuff. It was literally, how do I blow up a car so my police chase looks great?
And that's that's what I would expect. But then when I watched them do so well,
I know. Oh yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
even though like if you compare it to the 70s, like, okay, they did well on a lot of things, but if you compare it to what they did best, it just doesn't add up.
Well, and I think we talked a little bit about that once before when we talked about who were the makeup people and who was, there wasn't as much consistency with that then because the special effects world was still in its infancy. I mean, this is 1974, 75, 76. That's this when these were out. Star Wars and ILM were a year away.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the thing that revolutionized,
Yeah, before
was a few years away.
Yeah, before Industrial Light Magic, that wasn't
that.
I mean, you can't expect the makeup artists to be consistent when the writers and directors aren't even consistent. I mean, we had 20 episodes and we had so many writers and directors. I mean, like, what was it, like 6 or 7 different ones through the 20 episodes?
That's also not completely unheard of even today. Like you have in a 25 episode season, you have 18 different directors. Like that's normal. But the what's different now is the idea of showrunners and producers that are more involved in the continuity process because they have shows that are more intended to have continuity.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing because remember these are the advents of all of the things, and I think that so many of the people that are doing it today were in some ways us in the sense that we can look back at this and critique it, and they were the people that had these similar critiques and said you can't really do this way. You need to have one effects or one visual, editor, or maybe not editor, but visual producer. Okay, you could have 10 different editors, but you have to have somebody who's what's the overall visual, continuity of the show? How does that whole world work? So you have teams of SFX people who are consistent, in Britain.
Or you have things where like in Hemlock Grove, like I remember Monica was having trouble finding out who did some of the effects because a company did them. Right. So it might not have been the same person every time, but the company was in charge of that and had the ability to do it. And whoever they put on the job was.
And if you look at 2020, 2021 credits, because I've looked at a lot of those trying to find music supervisors, and they do list specific individual artists now. Whereas even, what was it, 2013 when Hemlock Grove came out? They weren't doing that then. So it's ridiculously new now.
And that's it. I mean, you look at the staff they had on some shows. Now, I'm a Doctor Who fan, British television. I watch British television all the time, particularly like obviously Doctor Who is my, where I started back, long before I've been watching Doctor Who since 1977. And there were people who made it work. I mean, you had, the one thing they didn't have was they didn't always have consistent special effects people. Right. They had fairly consistent music people, and they had season-based producers and script editors. So those were the people who were in charge with continuity. They would have six to seven serials in a year, usually, anywhere from four 25-minute episodes to 6 25-minute episodes. But you would have about 24 of those or 25 of those or 20, something like that in a season. And the producer and the script editor were always the same. The obviously the music people were always the same. And even like the special effects music people were the same. But the visual editors,
music supervisors, they work for the big house a lot of the time. So like so I'm working music publishing, and so we'll get music like requests from the same supervisor for multiple shows for say Netflix. So they work for Netflix, not the show. And so I mean, and there are some that work specifically for the show, but like they're not getting replaced every episode because they're working for the corporation that's housing this.
Well, that's exactly what happened with these. These were obviously British shows, so their production structures are a little different. Right. But the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, they were the people that were, they actually are one of the pioneers of special effect music and audio effects and how that could be used. Electronic music and electronic effects from from an audio perspective.
Even now, the UK is more cohesive in their music they use for TV and stuff than we are.
Sure. So that's the thing, is that all those changes were, have come into the industry, and I think that you could make a show like this. I mean, you'd have to change it a lot. I mean, they had and we'll talk about that probably a little bit, but the abysmal approach to what they did to bring it back a few years ago,
for reference, Courtney, there is a spinoff, and we considered adding it to the end as like season 2. Watching Kolchak, there was a remake, and it is so atrocious that we did not even put it.
Who's the Kolchak?
Kolchak was played by you're gonna know the guy, Stuart. Oh, he's been in a couple other shows. He was in the Moonlight show, the werewolf show Moonlight. Stuart. Do you remember Mary Kate?
Stuart Townsend.
Yes.
Stuart Townsend. Yes.
I didn't even have the right look for Kolchak. I'm looking it up now.
Yeah, he was too hip. He was just too hip a guy to be Kolchak.
Gabrielle Union? No, this isn't.
Oh yeah, that's right. Gabrielle Union and Stuart. Yeah, no, it was not a good dynamic there.
Not adding it on.
Yeah,
good call.
Yeah, no, we were gonna. Yeah, we talked early on, and it's like it's no continuity. No, it's not even. I don't even think it has any kind of true respect for the source material either. I mean, I just. I don't hate Stuart Townsend. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he's not a bad actor. I've seen him in some things where and Gabrielle Union as well. I mean, I've
exactly. I love Gabrielle Union, but I can't put her in a Kolchak show.
No.
The next award goes to the best actor or actress, and I felt like it would have been really easy to just say Darren McGavin, so I didn't. But I also did not go to a guest star either. I went with Simon Oakland.
Who was Simon Oakland? I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Simon Oakland is
Tony Vincenzo.
Tony Vincenzo, the boss.
So, me too. He was, but I do have to say, I will say, while Darren McGavin would have been an easy choice because he was throughout the show the most, Simon Oakland was the most consistent, regardless of if you look at like timing of the show, his character never changed. Whereas Darren McGavin from the beginning was more creepy and then went to more humorous, and like, which is how the show progressed.
I think there was a lot of there were moments where you could see Darren McGavin not wanting to do the show anymore, creeping into his character. The more the show became farcical, he made the character.
Yeah.
But Tony was Tony every time. Even when he was in 3 minutes of the whole episode, it was the best scene.
And you never questioned it when he did something. You weren't like, why did he do that? No, it was, yeah, absolutely. Tony would do that. Like every time. I agree. Simon Oakland was the best.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you only had 3 characters that really were consistently in the show, right? You had a couple other office people, but I think Kolchak and Tony were in every episode,
and then Ron was only not in 2.
He was in most of them,
but his character wasn't consistent.
No, his character was in 8 different characters, really.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, being kind of the uptight nerdy guy was like a perfect character for them, because he had that whole thing going on, and he was so stiff and formal, and preppy and precise, and
but then he started being funny too.
Right. It was a great character, but he didn't hold on to it.
That's again. It speaks to the sum of the fact that a good script editor and producer who were consistent, who kept continuity across shows that have only a rough again, Doctor Who is a story that has a certain continuity of its canon, and even that they've destroyed. But it'll be a different story for a different day. But but the thing is that every show, even if you might have referenced the fact that you just came from, some planet, Metabelus 3, okay, the show wasn't dependent on where you used to be. Typically, it was like, this episode is, independent of that, and there's just, the frame is locked.
Yeah.
So you take a character like Ron, who was that uptight guy, who you made funny by actually every once in a while throwing in a line that was like, counter character. If you threw that in where it's like, you don't fit the mold.
He tried to play the cool guy in that episode. Was it with the Air Force that was there?
Yeah.
And
no, that's
it
not.
didn't work.
Or no, the one episode where I thought that I related to him because he was talking about the guy setting the mayor's house on fire and like cracking up. I was like, while I relate to that sense of humor, 10 episodes ago, Ron does not relate to that sense of humor.
He doesn't. And this is that every character should have a role against the other characters because that creates a tension, right? Tension and drama. And having a character be the blustery boss character, perfect.
Great.
Okay, the disheveled, kind of off the hook, semi-believable, has-been reporter who's just like like bumbling, bumbles his way through to success, and then the prim and uptight guy. You got to have those things. You can't be half and half or mixed, because that doesn't create drama. That's like, well, you're just like there,
Right.
So Tony was, again, Carl was good. Darren McGavin is I think a good actor.
Yeah.
I like a lot of things he's been in. I think that he did check out though.
Yeah.
Okay, in the show because
Definitely.
he was unhappy about the production direction. I think from everything I've read outside of this.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because I thought the character in the show had such potential, but that's not how entertainment works sometimes.
Right.
So Tony's a great choice. Great choice.
So next is the best episode.
The best episode.
And this one, I thought about going with the aliens, but I ended up picking the Ripper because it was the first episode and I felt like it was the most true to what the show was supposed to be. I thought the writing was phenomenal. I thought the choices to use light and shadows as the special effects instead of doing anything crazy was good. I appreciated the fact that it didn't have the problem that the later episodes had where you spent 40 minutes figuring it out and then solved it in 5. There was actually a good chunk of the episode where Kolchak knew what was going on but didn't know how to stop it. And so I just really, really liked that episode.
So I almost went with the Ripper because it was an excellent episode. I definitely agree. But if you've listened to the last 3 episodes, to no one's surprise, I picked the Youth Killer because I had such a great time watching that episode. I thought the storyline was excellent. And the woman who played Hecate, she was probably the best guest star we have had. I'm going to say that. And I thought it was so well done. I do agree that the Ripper was true to what the show wanted to be. But if you look at the storyline, I picked the Youth Killer, and maybe I'm biased, but that was my favorite.
Well, that's okay. I don't rank the Ripper very high. I don't rank it very low, but I just don't rank it. It's not in my memory as well. Actually, my personal favorite episode, I'll say a lot for the alien episode. My personal favorite episode is, when I saw this episode, just to put it into context, in the mid 70s, my grandparents lived in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. And so going to my grandparents' house, I had to go buy Spanish moss trees. Okay. So the Paramount Faye episode scared me to death when I was a kid, and I thought, and I actually think that's one of the best episodes of the whole series, just because it was the whole idea of something in your dreams coming to life and killing you. I mean, or killing people. Which is actually, I think it's one of their best concept stories.
Yeah.
It was well done. Yeah.
But from, like I said, not wanting to like try to put my vote in for myself. I think that, I mean, Ripper was actually again very, very early in the narrative, had the best potential to be what Kolchak could have been in many ways. But I actually, The Youth Killer is one of my favorite episodes too. It's one of the few that I remember. Like I said, I remember 5 or 6 very well, and The Youth Killer, just is like I said, one of those memorable ones that I've never really forgotten. The Chopper one because it was stupid. The Nightly one just because I knew there was a night, but I couldn't remember the story. I just remember the night one.
It's okay, I can't remember the story either, and I watched it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. I forgot the Sentry completely. I mean, you go through what's good and bad about all of them. I knew there was a werewolf one, but I couldn't remember it was on a boat for the life of me. I mean, just things like that. But the Spanish Moss Murders, the Energy Eater, to some extent, that was memorable for me.
We've discussed liking that one a lot too.
Yeah. The movie, the vampire movie, not the vampire show, the Night Stalker, not the vampire.
Yeah.
But I'll go with The Youth Killer. I think that was really a good episode. I think Kathie Lee Crosby, who went on to fame, and her biggest fame came not from drama, but from reality television. She was the host of Real People, one of the first shows that was kind of like it told stories about what real people did in the world.
Like
and she was
Real World-esque.
Well, it was more like a presenter story. It was
more like what Oprah did with like trying to get real people's lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very early. It was her and John Davidson. It was it told like wholesome stories of good people achieving things in the real world, but it was done on Sunday night television. And so she did that for many years. She was the first television adaptation of Wonder Woman a couple of years after that, a couple of years after Kolchak. And again, she was just one of those beloved characters. She had a kind of the feel when she was on Real People, kind of the love that people had for her was similar kind of to another Kathie Lee, but the Kathie Lee of much later, Kathie Lee Gifford.
I was saying Kathie Lee Crosby was like Kathie Lee Gifford with less wine.
With less wine.
That's probably a good move.
But it wasn't the same kind of like, she wasn't a daytime host. She was a nighttime, and so she was only on weekly. But that was a very popular show for quite a few years in the early 80s. So I think that she was talented. I mean, she never really, she wasn't a superstar in many ways, but I think she was a good actress. The episode had because it was tied to Greek myth, and it was something that was relatively knowable. Hecate isn't like the most popular of the Greek characters, but we know it. You recognize that, and So, and again, nowadays she's a villain that is opposed to Wonder Woman, so people should know her more. But we'll see how that goes. So yeah, I would, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go with that one. I think that's a good choice. Like I said, I wish the show could have followed the Ripper themes better.
Yeah, I agree.
And not devolved into a monster of the week. And that's one of the things, if you think about it, the 19th show of the series was more of a myth without a true monster, because she was the monster, if you will, but she was not a poorly realized one.
And
Right.
that's
You
one
know,
thing we talked about last week or the week before. I don't remember what week. We talked about like, because I know MK really loved the Aliens episode also, and it was great, but it was the placement of the episode that the youth killer fit more into the original like idea for the show because it was a little more horror, whereas the alien episode was more low key because you never saw it, and they just didn't quite hit on that fear of the unknown like you would expect, like the Ripper and stuff did.
Which I think the alien fear of the unknown probably hit harder in the 70s.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
When they didn't have as many, and we have Hellier now. We have all kinds of the fourth kind or whatever.
The thing I will say the thing that the episode that is rated the lowest on IMDb of the whole series is the alien episode, which I think is an atrocious travesty.
I agree.
There are like 12 worse episodes than that.
I mean,
it's not my number one, but there's definitely a lot worse episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we clearly think Mad Medicine's terrible.
Yeah.
But even again, I love the concept of doing the Aztec thing. I just, as I was watching Eric Estrada run around in that in the hockey arena, I'm like, what are we doing here?
That's
I just.
Yeah.
So there were obviously a number of ones that could be critiqued, because of their actualization, the concepts of all these myths that are even like, and that's where things went better later because people got, because it was better done. I mean, they used the same kind of ideas of myths and, local lore and, like the Sasquatch idea or whatever.
Even now, Aaron Mahnke is so popular with his podcast Lore because he dives into all of those, but it's, he actually dives into the real story of it.
So like I said, I think that was a good choice. I think that, like I said, there's about 5 episodes which I think are fantastic, and then there's a few which are just abysmal, and then there's a lot that are just there. I mean, and again, that happens with most shows, but it's a shame because this had a real solid potential to be good. It shows you. I guess it does show you the challenges with television is that there's just so much of it. I mean, and today it's worse because there's so much more. I mean, back when this show was made, there were 3 broadcast channels. Only 3. Fox didn't exist yet. So there were 3. And PBS didn't make really anything except for kids programming at the time and a few and truly educational shows. So that was, and nowadays there's like about 5,000 channels. And that doesn't even count the platforms that we look at, because again, alternate media, things that we do and look at here with, whether it's YouTube or any of the other,
anything streaming,
streaming services or what have you. There, there's just so much content anymore. It's a different dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Different dynamic.
So we have two more awards.
2 more awards, okay.
The next one is the best quote, which there's a lot of really good one-liners. This one was probably actually the hardest one for me to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And despite us talking about how it was a terrible episode, I chose a quote from the episode about the Aztecs. Mm-hmm. Because I think it is the quote that describes Carl Kolchak the most of anything. And it is a line that Kolchak says where he says, "I promise to show up on time with a new suit and a new hat, but I lie a lot."
100% represents Kolchak.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I picked the line that hit me the hardest, and I've talked about this already, but the final line of the entire series where Kolchak said, "Don't walk, run to the nearest exit." And I understand it's kind of a cop-out, but I don't know. When that line, I heard it, because there were plenty I laughed at, obviously. Yes. But that one, I was just like, you're right. I get it. And I don't think it's everyone's favorite. I think I am alone in that, but I'm okay with that. It was the one that got me for some reason.
Okay. Well, honestly, I don't remember enough of the dialogue to really
Yeah.
pick one. But Kolchak, I mean, there's just a lot of funny moments, and the thing is that sometimes I think the straight guys who deliver the serious lines that we all know aren't really as serious as they are tend to have tend to be humorous at the moment. So when you get a guy like Larry Linville, who's a cop in one of the episodes, I think Larry Linville was the cop in the he was a cop maybe twice because he was in 2 episodes.
Was he the one who played Mad Dog?
No, Larry Linville used to be in MASH, so he played Frank Burns in in MASH, the series. Larry Linville was in let's see what episode he was in. I just had it here. He was in Chopper.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, I know.
And then he was in it was at the beginning. He might actually have been in
He was in the movie too.
he was in the second movie or the first one?
The Night Stalker.
Oh, he was in The Night Stalker. So he played the cop from that, the first or was he a cop? No. Well, yeah, he was the cop that was a little sympathetic. But when these guys I'm just trying to see.
Let's see.
What am I looking for here?
Yeah.
I mean, some of them. Let me just pull this up real quick to kind of go over some quotes that I think are actually good. One of his lines, "Son, I've seen more dead bodies than you've had TV dinners." That's a good one.
That is a good one. I almost read the Kolchak line where he said, or I think it was Kolchak, he said it's not a crime to be a dead body or something like that. That was in the one, what was that episode? You know what I'm talking about? Where they had the school reporter was also there.
Yes. Oh, that was the succubus one.
Yes. Yeah.
There was just a couple that I really like quotes that I just wanted to take with me to the rest of my life, like when the union labor leader in the Century said, "How do you know how much my while is worth?" I was like,
that was a good one.
Nurse Eisen, I don't know if you remember that episode. Kolchak was talking to her. He says, "You really must enjoy your work," and she said, a well done autopsy is a joy forever."
I love that line. I don't remember that one. That may have been before me though.
Yeah, it was.
Because I love that line. And I want to tell people that even though I don't do autopsies.
Captain Leo Winwood and I have a long relationship, or had a relationship that was long and bloody, like the Crusades, only without the chivalry.
There was also one of the times where it was in the Rakshasa episode. Kolchak was explaining what he thought was going on, and the cop just said, "Yeah, you don't see too many Hindu Nazis."
Oh yeah, that's right. Because they had swastikas in that episode, right? Because that's actually the Hindu swastika, not the actual.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think as a whole, the quote I think one, because I have this one here too, is the thing that sums up the Kolchak one, because
I agree
about the haircut one, because he there was another episode, I think, and I'm just trying to.
It's the epitome of Kolchak. I mean,
what episode was that, Mary Kate?
That one was the Aztec episode.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Aztec episode. There was an episode where he said something kind of similar, and I apologize, I don't remember the quote, but it was in the episode where he was where he hired that girl, I think, to be the his typist. It was early on, and he was like staying in a hotel, and there was a very similar line about him with this whole thing about getting a suit or whatever, and he just because Tony was wanting him to do something or whatever.
That was in the vampire episode, because that's when he goes to LA to follow the vampire. I don't remember.
I don't know the exact quote, but
I don't remember exactly what he said, but you're right.
There was a lot of quotes that basically were just, he is who he is, and he's not anything but that. And I like the thing that, the thing is that the funny thing about it is that if you think about the guy's character, especially when it comes to dealing with people, he actually creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will.
Yeah.
Because he lies to people, and they know he lies to them. And yet when he tries to tell them the truth, he lies to them. Because it's like, we can't believe your, what's this like flashy thing on like your pic? You show me a picture, it looks like a light moved across the page. What does that mean? There's none of his pictures are good, because he's always taking them while he's being attacked or falling on his ass. The police steal most of them, and so you said it earlier. I mean, either the guy is he's either a lunatic or he's telling the truth, and since he lies a little bit, he's probably a lunatic. He probably should not have a job. Yeah. He probably should be incarcerated, but being permanently kicked out of Los Angeles, by being escorted out of town.
That did happen a couple times.
More than once, yeah.
So then the last award is our double helix, our MVP of the show. And I this one was tough. But I ended up going with something that I don't really think is true for anyone else, which in the past, the double helix has been the one thing that there didn't need to be a tiebreaker for, because it's really just the thing that is most valuable to you. And I just said the dynamic between the office staff, like the 4 people, like all the episodes where they just had like Emily and Ron and Tony and Carl shooting the shit. Like I was like, I really wanted to do have an office style documentary sitcom just about the 4 of them and what the fuck goes on in the office.
I agree. That was good. So for the double helix, I went a little off book, I guess. I picked the impact that Kolchak had on the rest of the genre. I mean, it was the direct influence for the X-Files.
Yes.
And it's the reason we have everything we like, those type of shows that we have today. And so I picked just the impact from the show in general.
That's a good one.
He didn't really fit into any of these awards, but I just want to give him one for existing. William Daniels, in anything he has ever done, ever, just a star.
Listen, Mr. Feeney is fantastic, okay?
I also wanted to give him an award, so I'm glad we brought this up.
Yeah, he actually played a pretty good cop in that episode. Which was that? That was an early episode.
It was early on.
It was unfortunately the vampire.
Oh yeah, he was the cop in the vampire.
Yeah.
Too bad. That was a terrible episode.
The thing is, like, the girl who Kolchak hired to do the typewriter for him was the best female sidekick for the first half of the show. Feeney was the best cop in the first half of the show. The whole guru thing was actually funny, but the vampire was terrible.
So bad.
Well, that's funny because actually, early on, and again, I don't know, it didn't really stretch through the show because the female sidekick thing, again, they had Carol Ann a little bit from the Office, which had its moments, but then they had a couple other ones,
like the college reporter in the Succubus episode,
right? And it's just. It kind of as the series changed, they changed that a lot.
Yeah.
Because, most of the earlier ones were women that Carl probably wanted to sleep with.
Yep.
Okay, and probably
Very
did.
fair.
You know, I mean, it was just,
Yeah.
you know, he picked them up at bars and things like that. They were like dancing on the stage, and then he was, you know, that was in like, was that the Ripper?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Where, you know, where they were
Where he took the belly dancer home with him.
the belly dancer, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the thing is, though, is that in the vampire one, the girl was a reporter, or no, she was a writer. She was writing a book, right? And he was trying to help her. He was basically telling her he was gonna, by helping him put her
Yeah,
notes
no,
together.
she was a real estate agent who used
Oh,
to
she was
be
a real
journalist.
estate agent that wanted to be a writer.
Yeah, and he was like, write this article for me while I investigate the stuff I'm
Yeah.
not supposed to be investigating.
Yeah, so
And
that
then-
those weird dynamics were there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, that goes back to, you know, you wish you could have found something consistent in that, because at least that was, you know, it was like adult comedy in a very mild sense. You know, you knew enough to know that there was something weird, but not really enough to be like offended, because that was like, you know, the
Right.
sensibilities of people in the 70s were much different.
Well, it's funny because the only time the way Carl spoke to a woman actually genuinely offended me was the time it turned out to be his wife.
Right?
Oh, that was, yeah, she was in the Century, right? The last,
Yeah, she was
Yep.
the cop in the Century, and he said something to her
Irene, the
about,
woman we all
her-
know and love.
yeah, he said something to her when fighting with her that was just like so sexist, and I was like, Carl is not exactly the most feminist man on the planet, but he's not like blatantly sexist. And then it's
Yeah.
like, trivia, that was actually his real life wife. And I was like, well, that's uncomfortable.
well, I suppose you get away with being sexist with your wife a lot more than somebody who's not, but
Fair.
if you do,
It felt like they were joking around back and forth, like they were like cracking on each other. And I was like, this is weird for someone we've never met. Then you find out it's his wife, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. He's like, you know, screwing around
well,
with
and you did comment, Mary Kay, I think in one of your posts, your Instagram or what have you, about there was actually some chemistry there with them. I mean, that was
and
one
that's
of the better, yeah.
we were like, but it was this last episode of the show, a cop we had never seen before, and then there was like real chemistry. And I think it was one of those
insane
things,
chemistry.
I think it was one of those things where they were like, you know what? Show's over. Don't even care anymore.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I don't think there's any right choice here. I mean, I think your individual picks are what you really want the award to be, because you can, you know, but the like I said, the show has some potentials, and again, this is kind of where we can kind of diverge into that. I mean, at some point here, just to wrap her up, but the things it could have done, like you said, you know, as much as, you know, you say that, you know, the Office-esque thing, you know, was probably more than they would have ever been able to do. But that dynamic could have been so much better defined to anchor the show. You know, you can't have, again, in an hour-long program that is anthology, you can't have a lot of that. And that was, I guess, they erred on the side of little, okay, to try to build the story that Carl was finding or going through. But Carl was a bumbling detective who didn't really, you know, he went on hunches that were like outlandish, and how they all pieced together. You know, there wasn't always a very logical A to B to C kind of, you know, and as someone who watches a lot of mystery shows, you know, I like a mystery. I like to be able to figure out, you know, you can't always figure out certain writers like actually through it. You've got to look back at the wrap up and say, well, I read this whole thing and I can't, now that I know who did it, I can then go follow the points.
You can find the foreshadowing.
Sometimes, like, you know, I mean, I like Agatha Christie, and I just finished watching all 5 seasons of Miss Marple, the Miss Marple mysteries from, earlier from like the 2000s. And they just perplexed me. I mean, I know the stories, I've read them, but, you know, if you're trying to watch the narrative as it's unfolding on the screen, it's like, who did that?
There were
interesting.
There were times when my dad was watching this where I had to go to bed, so I would miss the last 20 minutes, and then I would literally come home the next day and just be like, who was it? Because I had no idea.
And like, it's the idea of watching something you already know the ending to that is fascinating. I mean, the same thing happened to me with watching the movie The Game. I don't know if y'all have seen that. So like, they talked about that for Ray, oh God, I forgot his last name, but it was one of the unsolved mysteries that just came out in 2020. And so I went back and watched the movie. I knew how the movie ended. I knew exactly what happened, and it still had me on the edge of my seat the entire time.
Sure.
It's the same concept with Ms. Marple, and
Well, and that's it. Because I mean, I've watched different actors play the same thing and watched the same stories. I mean, I watched Evil Under the Sun, the movie back from the 70s or 80s. I watched the modern, David Suchet versions of all of those things.
yeah,
And they're entertaining, even though you know the answer. It's still, how do they put it together? But the thing is that in a show like Kolchak, you've got, they probably had fewer commercials back in the 70s, so it was probably closer to 50 minutes of
right.
there were probably about 10 minutes of commercial breaks in a show. How do you get there so that you lose the frame? The frame is the frame to them, because they're not trying to create a canon. They don't care about the end. They care about telling a story this week, and they want to sell 24 of them or 20 of them or whatever their thing is. They're not working in the same world that that fans work in. Fans want a show that gives me a backstory and a place to anchor my vision to, and to understand it and to grow with it, and to and that was the problem, is that in the 70s, that was just an emergent idea. Today, we're so much, more particular about it. And that's a good thing, because the whole television genre was still evolving.
Right.
I mean, the biggest shows back, the 70s are when dramas really happened. Most shows before that were light drama at best, mostly plotted situational comedies,
Yeah.
The whole idea of like the whole procedural police drama, it came out of the 70s, where it was real. I mean, there was some before, but they weren't as well defined. And if you look at most procedural dramas today, they were defined in the 70s. I mean, Mary Catherine, you watched Columbo, the entire series, and it went on for 30 years, roughly.
Yeah.
And it went from a series to a series of telemovies, but again, that was part of the defining era of those genres. What happened to Columbo, even though it wasn't like it was an anthology, more or less.
Yeah.
It still mattered to you as the viewer. You cared about the character.
But the other thing that Columbo had that Kolchak didn't was that in Columbo, you were only ever supposed to care about Columbo. Kolchak attempted to have these other characters that he had relationships with or building things with. Columbo, obviously, like there were other police or whatever, but it didn't matter, and it never pretended to matter who he was talking to, because it wasn't about his relationships. It was about how he solved the mystery.
Crime.
Yeah. Whereas Kolchak attempted to give you these relationships that you got invested in, and things like honestly, I mean, I never liked Ron, like Jack Gendrich's character. I never liked him, but it also, in the final episode when he wasn't there, it felt weird.
It was lacking.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that relationships matter.
Yeah.
Okay, because relationships, well, again, they matter to the extent that as an English, scholar, that nothing in writing is superfluous. Okay, there should be nothing that you're writing in your story that's a throwaway. Okay, everything should fit and have a purpose and not be accidentally included.
Right.
Okay, so if you have a character, they should be that character.
Mm-hmm.
And they should do what that character does to further the narrative. Okay, and if they're not furthering the narrative, okay, they're only distracting. And so when they don't show up, if they have a purpose in other versions of that same narrative, and they don't show up, you miss them because they're supposed to do something in this show.
Yeah.
That character has the role of X. Okay, that role matters to you because it centers you into the narrative yourself. Those characters pull you in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the whole idea like of a companion in Doctor Who. they're the ones that you're supposed to be, not
Yeah.
Doctor Who. I mean, you
Right,
could want to be that, but that character is the one that frames you against something that's completely crazy to you.
Yeah.
And so, again, those characters, you're not Kolchak, okay? You might want to be Kolchak, but you're not him. And so, how do you understand Kolchak? Well, you have somebody else relate that to you. It's part of the narrative structure. If they're not there, you miss them. But if they are there, they have to do that role. And the problem, like again, it goes back to that continuity. Do they do the role all the time, or do they not do the role all the time? And if their role changes too often, it confuses you because it uncenters you from what your expectations are. So Ron can't be the comedian on purpose. He can be the comedian by accident. An accidental comedy is what a character like him is, because he's too straight to be a comedian, but he's comic in his straightness.
Yeah.
Okay? Miss Emily is comedic because she's a doddering old woman. If she started to talk to you about like advanced theories of something, you would say, well, what does this old woman know? You wouldn't be, it wouldn't be her character.
Right.
You know, if Tony ever said, Carl, you're right, we need to like investigate this creepy monster that you just told me about, it wouldn't be Tony. Okay, characters have a role and they have to fulfill them. And we lose that when they don't.
Yeah.
Writers have gotten better at that over time because fans also have gotten better at it. Fans also complain a lot. And not to say that they're going to change any one thing, but people that write now, you know, unless they have a total agenda that's outside of what fans want and how to be entertained, if they want to have a message, you know, that's fine, you can do that. But fans don't necessarily care about the message. They'll listen to it as long as it doesn't take them out of their characters, out of their show, out of the drama. Once you take somebody out of the drama because you put something in that's alien to them, but not to, you know,
right,
they lose it. So this was the beginning of fandom, these shows. And so there's a Kolchak fandom out there. It's not huge, but it's, you know, because unfortunately Kolchak was from the 70s, and some of us, you know, and it didn't have, I mean, it's predecessors. No, it's successors. Excuse me.
Right.
Its successors were not it. Its successors were inspired by it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge cult following for the X-Files.
Whereas things like Star Trek, the predecessors were still Star Trek. So people could go back and.
So you have that whole continuity, even if it was a completely different world, a different century, a different whatever. It's still a Star Trek, which has some connections through. So that's why those live better. Yeah. But again, that whole stories type created the next decades worth of story types.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, that's where Kolchak fits in. That's where, like I said, with you, Mary Catherine, it's the whole idea of a frame that works and relationships that matter in the narrative. And that's because these things really are not just, you know, it's more than television. I mean, you know, we have a visual medium today, but storytelling is as old as time because all we know about time is a story. Okay, and again, like I said, to be totally deep, and I'll throw it out there because I love this line. We're all just stories, in the end.
I feel that as a writer.
So you better make it a good one. Anyhow.
Well, and with that, we say goodbye to Kolchak. At least,
Peace out, Carl.
at least on the podcast.
It's been real, but everything has to come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are.
So we, as you all know, it is the month of October, the spooky season. So for the rest of the month, we are going to be doing some movies just to get us through to Halloween. We've got some special things planned. And then come November, we will be starting our new series. But still a surprise. So, Courtney.
So, I'm picking our first movie, which is coming out on the 17th. You can catch this film on Hulu. This is the movie that introduced me to horror and made me realize that I could love it without being terrified to turn my light off at night. I went with Hide and Seek. It is a movie that I watched every week when I got the movie on DVD.
Oh no.
And I'm still to this day pissed off that there is not a sequel. And that's fine. I understand. But it was one of Dakota Fanning's early movies, and Robert De Niro was the main character. I believe I had this before I came, and then I got caught up.
Yeah, we've talked about it on the podcast before because it's one of Monica's favorites.
Right. It was. I mentioned it before.
Oh, yeah, you did.
It was
You did.
me.
Oh,
It was me.
you.
I've mentioned it multiple times,
Okay.
but Famke Janssen is also in it.
Oh, that's why we talked about
Bring us
it.
back to Hemlock Grove.
Right.
And but yeah, this was a big Robert De Niro film that nobody else may have liked but me. But it was one of the early Dakota Fanning films also. And it was the first horror movie I owned, and I watched it literally weekly once I owned it. So, and Mary Kate, you've never seen it, right?
I have not.
Okay. So I haven't seen it since I was a child. So we'll see what happens. But I loved it.
All right.
So
The 2005 movie.
uh-huh.
So it's older.
It's older, but not like
Man, you say that like that was so long ago.
I mean, look, it was
but-
16 years ago.
Oh,
I know.
Mary Catherine, we had a discussion about a week ago about when a Taylor Swift song came out.
did
And-
happen.
And I'm like, that was like, what, yesterday? And you're like, no, it was in 2012. And I'm like, no.
Is that the
it's
Red
not.
album?
What song was it?
We were talking. Oh no, we were talking about the fact that "Teardrops on My Guitar" came out in 2007, I think.
Yeah, that was the
It was
first
like,
one.
that was even crazier than, I mean,
Original
Yeah.
T-Swift.
but it was the song was I was looking at something online, looking at something in music, and they mentioned that, was it Blank Space?
Oh, Blank Space was.
This was
That was
2012
like
or
13.
It was 2013. It was 2013. Yeah.
And I'm like, no way. That's just not possible, you know?
Yeah.
But anyhow, not that I'm a Taylor Swift fan, by the way, but it was just, you know.
I am.
Yeah.
Well, it's odd because I was on my way to a Bills football game yesterday, and on our bus to the game, they were playing some music, and some of the people were a little shocked that I was surprisingly well versed in, you know, the lyrics of many songs like "Party in the USA" and.
I thought you just had if you had your regular tailgate playlist on, I would mostly be shocked when 679 by Fetty Wap comes on, because the fact that that's on your playlist still always throws me off.
I did have that. I was never quite the Fetty Wap fan, but no, I mean the playlist is a little tamer this time because we had a lot of, like, you know, young adults on the thing, so I had no buck
Had to be a little
cherry.
more PG.
You know, no buck cherry today, but
Probably best.
but we did have, and then the other song was so "Party in the USA," and then which was funny, but the Kesha and Pitbull.
Timber.
Timber, yep.
Because I'm not a Kesha fan, but I like Pitbull too.
He's a real cool guy. My old boss in music publishing, she's like met him a lot of times in New Orleans and said he's real chill.
He seems like a Mr. Worldwide is okay with me. I kind of like him. He's a little bit vulgar, but I can live with that. But
This is a fun fact from the music publishing world. We have a song, Get Ready, is Blake Shelton and Pitbull. And when you call his manager, they're like, "Did you want to know about Mr. Worldwide?" And it's like, dude, you're his manager. You know his name. Like, let's talk about it. They all call him Mr. Worldwide or Mr. 3. Is it 303 or
It's
something?
305.
Like, oh my
It's
god,
305.
305. They either call him Mr.
It's in your code.
The Bills
and that's
tweeted the Bills posted the most savage picture in the world after we beat Miami 35-0, and it said you can't have Mr. 305 without 35-0.
Yeah. So his whole team calls him Mr. Worldwide and Mr. 305, and it's like, that's a little much. But he's apparently a super nice guy, and he's like, he helps a lot in his community and stuff. So he's a good person. But
So you're watching, and you're going to be discussing the first of these movies, because typically our genres television, but in preparation for a transition to a new series, and this is the Halloween season. We figured we'd go a little, old school with some horror, suspense, thriller type of stuff to kind of switch it up, kind of get your head in a different way for the one of the favorite holidays of America. They don't celebrate this anywhere else in the world, but in America they do. Not. But hide and seek could be interesting. It's a psychological kind of thriller. I mean, the father is a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so it's one of my faves. Two of my favorite actresses are in it, actually, because I like. I remember Famke Janssen not from your Hemlock Grove series, but she was
X-Men.
She was from X-Men.
Yeah.
And she was Jean Grey.
Yeah.
And before she was Jean Grey, actually, she was a Bond villain with who had a great name. Anna Tapa was her name, as all Bond villain names were. But the other one was a girl who I've loved since she was a kid. She's not actually, she's my age actually now. She's just a little bit younger than me, but she was in the Karate Kid and the Back to the Future series. She most recently was in the first season of The Boys, the Prime Video series. That's Elizabeth Shue.
Oh, I know Elizabeth Shue.
And so she's got fourth billing on the show, so she had a pretty good role in it. But yeah, I mean, Robert De Niro is Robert De Niro. People think he's a wonderful actor. I think he's kind of a jerk, but that's just a whole other story. But
I mean,
it should be interesting to watch.
Both. You can be both.
Right.
He's a lot of wonderful actors.
But this movie,
a lot of wonderful actors are actually jerks as people because they spend money to be other people.
See, I'm one of those people that, by and large, doesn't mind being entertained by people who don't think like me, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. I just don't like them to tell me that I'm a jerk for not thinking like them. So that's where I, entertain me. Just entertain me. That's,
right.
Your thing.
I agree.
So, but that'll be good.
Then the week after, it will be my surprise movie.
It'll be a good sci-fi film.
Well, hopefully. It's hard because sci-fi is kind of my area of expertise, but movies are not. I don't really watch movies. I only watch TV. So
that's all right. You'll find.
Do you want a season-fitting sci-fi movie?
You and I will talk about this
off air.
There's a few that might be interesting.
So we will see you next week. Oh, I forgot we have to plug our Instagram and stuff. Yes, because if you follow us on Instagram, you'll see that Courtney is actually making our Instagram a real place now.
We are having a fun time on there.
So you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Death and Aliens. You can follow
and I think we should give a shout out to one of our Instagram followers.
Oh my God.
Yes. Stephen Perry. Thanks. Shout out to you, Stephen.
He had the most excellent comment of the week.
He has theorized / made it his secret hope and dream that really Kolchak just moved to a Midwestern town, settled down, had a family, and gave them a very memorable Christmas with pink pajamas and a BB gun.
Yeah.
as a result of a time travel accident because this had to fit the genre.
Absolutely. Bring in the sci-fi.
Bring in the sci-fi.
You can follow me online at EMKAY_superstar.
You can follow me at CECloud13 everywhere.
And you can't really follow me yet, but I have a channel on YouTube called Panopticon Village, which talks about popular culture and political concepts that we're working on. It's based upon Doctor Who and the Prisoner television series, and some of their themes and how they apply to just the genre as well as what's happening in the world today. So
Can you
it's
spell it?
Panopticon, PANOPTICON,
Okay.
Village, VILLAGE.
Okay.
And so we're so that's, I mean, there's not content really there yet. The channel is out there, and I'm developing things, and I'm one of those people that is kind of particular. So I've got I'm actually building sets and things like that because I'm crazy that way.
Whereas I was like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast. And then 2 weeks later, I started a podcast. I didn't really think about it.
Where do we think MK got it from?
Yeah, but see, I could have worked a little harder on making it good. I said, nah, who needs it to be good? Let's just do it.
Well, and I think that's the evolution. So again, MK does take after me a little bit, but she's actually been much more into the theatrical world. She's actually she's been a stage manager and a production manager and all sorts of good things in that world, as well as a teacher. And so being in front of people is much more her her daily gig. I pretend sometimes, I've been a politician in my day and a few other things, but
I feel that as a lawyer who's not in front of people, I agree. Me too.
Well, that's it. So there's some diversity here, but we live in pop culture. I mean, that's what people do. You can turn off the television for sure. You can not watch movies. You can avoid social media, and sometimes that might be the best solution in general. But we are creatures of our culture. It's ingrained in us, and I think we should engage it. We shouldn't just let culture. We should be part of it. I mean, it's simply not. Being passively involved in anything is a mistake, I think, for everybody. And so, whether you love what's happening or you don't love what's happening, or you like what you're watching on television, or you want them to do something different, talk about it. Talk about it. That's that's what, and if you have a thought or an idea, listen, there's plenty of platforms out there. I watch a lot of people on social media, a lot of folks, people who I agree with, people who I despise vehemently. I mean, on an ideological level, I found out a long time ago that there's nobody worth hating. I mean, as a person, no matter what they believe, because they're people and they're entitled to their own opinion. But if we don't have dialogue and hear whatever everybody thinks, whether you like it or not, you could hate what somebody has to say, but let them say it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you owe it to your philosophy to know how to win an argument. It's easy to win an argument if you just beat the other person to death. You win. I mean, whether you're right or wrong, and that's not the really way to do it. So, so we talk about pop culture. We talk about things we love: science fiction, horror, drama. Whatever those things are, talk about them. And hopefully, people find a home here and start engaging. It's interesting to see a perspective. I mean, two young people, who want to talk about the things that mean something to them. So.
Okay.
That's what we're here for.
That's it.
On that note, we will see you all next week.
Watch hide and seek. See you next Sunday.